Welcome to Last Call, where we are here every time to navigate the road to Jesus' return. And we always want to be practical. We're going to be practical again today. We've got an amazing topic because when we think of signs, like key signs of Jesus' return and that it's coming soon, at least we believe that on this podcast, this sign is often overlooked. Like we typically might think of when Jesus talked about wars and rumors of wars or pestilence or famines or other things. We're looking like what's going on here with the Antichrist spirit in the world, or who is the Antichrist, and all of these kinds of things. But what we're talking about today is the Jews have been and are right now today migrating back to the land, meaning Israel. If you saw our last podcast, we talked about how Israel became a nation in 1948, and it was happening even before then, but especially at that moment when Israel became a nation. And since the Jews have been coming back to Israel, this is actually a biblical prophecy being fulfilled in our day. We're going to get to the biblical underpinnings here shortly, but I just want to introduce, or I should say reintroduce, the two guys with me. We've been on previous podcasts together, and these guys are experts in this area of the Jews getting back to the land that must happen before Jesus returns. The Hebrew word for that is Aliyah. So we're talking about Aliyah today. And this, as much as famines and earthquakes and wars and rumors of wars, this is just a very compelling sign that Jesus is coming back soon. So with that said, I want to reintroduce Stephen Burke from Texas. He founded the Lord Will Provide. So welcome back, Stephen.
It's good to be back with you. Thanks.
Yeah, and Dale Schlafer, he was with us on the previous podcast, which was awesome as we talked about Israel becoming a nation, and Dale is the founder of the Center for World Revival and Awakening. So welcome back, Dale.
Hi, good to be with you.
So guys, let's jump into this. But first, like, how did we even get interested in this topic of, like, not just that Israel became a nation, but that the Jews are actually migrating? So let's share those stories. Dale, you want to go?
Yes, the first for me, it came about because I started going to Israel. At first, I think I mentioned that once before, that I was just like every other evangelical pastor. We prayed, we gave, we supported Israel from a distance, but I had no personal part of that. And going to Israel the first time, I was confronted with, would you take over this apartment here with us? And I went, what? I mean, out of the blue, we had just got off the plane, and this guy's presenting me a ministry. And that's where it started. And for me, that whole thing then of beginning to study and look at the various aspects, and of course, one of them is the Jews' return to Israel. And you can't miss that when you're in Israel, because you see such a mix of different races and different languages. Yet you don't even hear all Hebrew. Lots of times when you're with this group from Ethiopia and you're looking at Black Jews speaking Ethiopian, it's like, what? And so that began to really grab me. And what did God say then about the return? And as you mentioned earlier, it's called Aliyah, which is just simply the return. And it's a wonderful thing to observe how it's happening in our day. And hopefully today, the audience will be excited to hear the kinds of things we're going to share.
Yeah, it is just so compelling when you start looking at what's happened. I saw a video some years ago that showed how Jews in Russia were like filling airplanes, jets, and they were flying in as they were migrating back to the land, Israel, and so many things. I think I want to jump in here, Stephen, before we get to you, because Dale just mentioned Ethiopian Jews, and that's actually part of my story and how I got interested in this topic. So actually, the brief story for me is that I started hanging out with you two. That's that's how I got interested in this topic. But the longer story is that through you guys, and saying that this is happening right now. It's part of the fulfilled prophecies that Jesus will return soon. That I read through the scriptures, and I found over 20 passages that talk specifically about that that God will gather the Jews back to the land before Jesus' return. I saw this happening in our day. I saw the scriptural support for it. And then getting to Ethiopian Jews, I just happened through one of my sons said, "Hey, Dad, we know you like a true story when it comes to movies. Hey, watch the Red Sea Diving Resort." And I did, and it's a really quality film. And it's in 2019, and it spells out what was going on with the Israeli government getting these Ethiopian Jews who were actually refugees in Sudan to get them back to the land. And it really was on the silver screen, it was a picture of Aliyah. It was a picture of what God is doing in our day. Now, that part of the Aliyah was happening in 1984, 85, that time frame. But anyway, very compelling, and really would recommend the Red Sea Diving Resorts. So that's part of my story. And how about you, Stephen? How did you get interested in this?
Well, for me, I had a normal job, 18-year career in advertising and public relations. And then God asked me to quit my job to begin a ministry in Guatemala. So I was going back and forth to Guatemala down in Central America, and kind of the normal thing, planting churches and bringing mission teams, that sort of thing. And then in 2008, I had an encounter with the Lord, an open vision, and that with my eyes open, I saw this play out in front of me like a movie of things that are coming to this country, to the United States, and it really scared me. But it was in that process of, I understood that persecution from that vision, persecution was coming to believers. But over time, really just a couple of months later, I was up in Alaska, and God started showing me that he was going to be returning Jews to the land of Israel, and that it was going to be a dangerous kind of maneuver. It wasn't going to be just, yay, let's go, a picnic. It was going to be very dangerous. People were going to be after us, that sort of thing, in a very negative way. But God has a plan in the midst of all this negativity, this difficulty, this pressure that's coming, to move his people from wherever they are in the world back to the land of Israel. And that is for me where it started.
Yeah, and everybody, you're in for a real interesting podcast here with Stephen, because he's going to be sharing his stories, actually accounts of what he has observed in terms of how God is doing this right now today, how he has been doing it for years, but how he continues to do this move of the Jews back to the land, back to Israel, the nation of Israel. He's going to get into that here shortly. But before that, let's just talk briefly here about the scriptures. I just said a moment ago, I identified over 20 scriptures that could not have been the Aliyah back in 539 BC, when the king of the Medes, Darius, when he decreed that the Jews could go back. But we're talking about the Aliyah, or the migration of the Jews, that's happening today before Jesus' second coming. So any scriptures come to mind that would show this, that we're seeing the fulfillment of scripture today?
For me, Isaiah 11:12 is one. He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four corners of the earth.
Yeah, right.
Strong scripture about this return.
And this would be really good time to include why this is not Jews returning in 539 or 538 BC, technically, but why it's not then, but why it's happening today. Because when Darius makes that decree in 539, we know from the books of Nehemiah and Ezra and other scholarship that only about 2 to 3% of the Jews went back to the land back then. So what Stephen just quoted there, it says all of the Jews will come back. So this is clearly not talking about something that God did back then, but it's something that has yet to happen. Anyway, go ahead, Dale.
Zechariah chapter 10, verse 8, I will whistle for them. I just love that picture, God whistling for them, and I will gather them. Surely I will redeem them, and they will be as numerous as before. Though I scatter them among the peoples, they will remember me in the distant places. They and their children will survive, and they will return. And so, just a great thing to remember that I think I call that one the Great Aliyah. I mean, it's happening. Obviously, there's 9 million Jews, and most of them have come from outside, and yet we wait. I think God waits for the whole gathering of all the Jews, and that'll be something to watch and see, and we get to be a part of it as best I can tell.
You know, the scripture, Jeremiah 16, 14, and 15, it says, right now, people are saying, how great is our God that brought the Israelites up out of Egypt? But a time is coming when we're going to be saying, how great is our God that brought the Israelites and their descendants up out of the land of the north and out of all the places where I've banished them. Also, that's Jeremiah 23, 7 and 8. They both go together. And it is that move of God. It's going to be so great, this end times move, that we are going to be kind of forgetting a little bit about Moses and what he did. And we're going to be saying, how great is our God that did this? Because it is the numbers of people back in Moses' day they estimate around 6 million. And they were crossing a desert, maybe 450 miles across. But now we're talking about tens of millions, if not more, Jews moving from wherever they are in the world across oceans and mountains and deserts and all kinds of terrain back to the land. And so God is creating or raising up, I'll say, a kind of a network of people who are preparing for this day, preparing to move these people from wherever they are in the world back to the land of Israel.
Yeah.
And Stephen, we got to get to that network in your stories, your accounts here in a moment, but we can't keep going until we got to put up on the screen, and we've got to talk about Jeremiah 16, or at least read it here with a few brief comments before you jump in to your stories, Stephen. So let's do that. Let's put that up on the screen. And Jeremiah 16, starting in verse 14, says, "However, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no longer be said, as surely as the Lord lives, who brought the Israelites up out of Egypt. But it will be said, as surely as the Lord lives, who brought the Israelites up out of the land of the north and out of all the countries where he had banished them." This is a huge move of God, bringing all these Jews back, which you just highlighted, Stephen. And it goes on to say, "For I will restore them to the land I gave their ancestors. But now I will send for many fishermen, declares the Lord, and they will catch them. And after that, I will send for many hunters, and they will hunt them down on every mountain and hill and from the crevices of the rocks," meaning every Jew is going to come back to the land. It's not just 2 or 3%, as I highlighted a moment ago.
Right.
This is like a totally different thing. And Stephen, I love how you highlighted that we often think of the Exodus. That's the huge migration of the Jews from Egypt to the Promised Land. And of course, we highlight that. But something is afoot today, right now, that we won't be talking about what happened under Moses anymore. It's literally the amazing move to bring, like you said, tens of millions of people into the land. And it happens just before Jesus' return. I would just include, I'm glad you highlighted Jeremiah 23. I would also include Ezekiel 39, 25 through 29. Very powerful as well. And there's many, many others. So we're on some pretty solid scriptural footing as we're looking here at the fulfillment of this prophecy in our day. Stephen, please share with us some of what you've observed.
Well, even to lay a little bit of more foundation, when you look at the history of Israel, after King Solomon died, you had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. They split. Israel split into 2 kingdoms. And so you had Israel with 10 tribes, and then you had Judah, which is the southern kingdom with Benjamin and Judah and a little bit of Levi in there. And so what happens is the northern kingdom begins to turn away from God. And after a period of time, God's had enough, and he allows the Assyrians to come in and take them out of there. And they are dispersed into the world. They assimilate, and they're just kind of disappeared into the world. And they're known today as the 10 lost tribes. And then you have the southern kingdom who is Judah and Benjamin, and they get brought into Babylonian captivity for 70 years, and eventually they make their way back to the land of Canaan, which is now Israel, and that's where they live. And so, just in general terms, who we're seeing right now in Israel are the two tribes of Judah and Benjamin. I'm sure there's others in there as well, but just in general terms. So you have the 10 lost tribes who were dispersed in the land. And God says in Jeremiah 30, verse 3, he says, "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will bring my people Israel," which is the northern kingdom, "and Judah, the southern kingdom, back from captivity and restore them to the land I gave their ancestors to possess, says the Lord." So the Lord himself says he will bring back Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom. And so the 10 lost tribes are lost. So where are they? I mean, people have found pockets of them or whatever, but there are still millions more out there that the Lord says he's going to bring back to the land, and he'll whistle for them. He'll raise a banner. Somehow they're going to have on their hearts, I need to go back to the land of Israel, and we are going to help them.
And just as a historical note there, so the 10 tribes in the north, they were defeated, crushed, exiled, tortured actually too, in 721 BC by the Assyrian Empire that came in and devastated them. They have been dispersed ever since. So this is really miraculous if what we're saying, and we're saying what the Bible is saying, and it is miraculous that these 10 tribes that have never come back from 721 BC. Oh my goodness. How is this going to happen in our day? And then again, back to the 587 BC destruction of Jerusalem and the southern kingdom. They've been dispersed ever since. And they did have a chance to go back, as I mentioned, in 538 BC, but most of them didn't take the opportunity. They enjoyed living in Babylon. So we are talking about something here that is truly profound, miraculous, and it's a global move of God, because these Jews are scattered everywhere.
Yep, they are. And it's absolutely amazing how this is even going. So for me, I had no clue about this at all. I had no interest in Israel. God just didn't put that on me. I was going back and forth to Guatemala. I get this download, this open vision back in 2008. And from then on, it's just been a journey of walking this thing out and meeting people who God has been speaking to about preparing for this day. The fulfillment of these scriptures that we are talking about today. And this all has to take place prior to Jesus' return, as you were saying. So this is a key piece of the road that leads to Jesus' return.
Yeah. So, Stephen, I was so stunned. I know Dale was too, when we heard you speak the first time, and you're talking about God leading you to people in the U.S. And I know it's gone international since then, but let's stick with the U.S. for the moment. But tell us the actual ways that people are hearing God's voice and actually putting feet to what they're hearing and actually preparing to help the Jews get back to the land.
Yeah, there's so many individuals around the country that are just, they hear God and they're being friends of God and they're doing the things that he asked them to do. And so, for example, I was speaking at a meeting in Kansas City, and there was a lady that was in the back of the room, and somehow I knew that I was supposed to go where she lives, and it turned out to be up in, I'll just say what part of the country, up in the upper Midwest. And I end up going to their property, and there's a bunch of people that live on this property. It's 40 acres, and they have a ministry going on there. But as they're showing me around the property, we're on this four-wheeler, and we just end up, they take me to the back of the property, and there's just a grove of trees, and you don't see anything else. As you're passing all this agriculture, all their crops and all that stuff, you go to the back of the property, go into these grove of trees, and there is a double set of steel doors on a mound. And I'm like, what is that? And they open up the double steel set of doors. We go in, there's another double steel set of doors. And we go all the way into this thing. It's a 4,500 square foot underground concrete bunker that God has told them to build. It has bunk beds, it has showers, it's all self-contained. It has toilets in there. There's all kinds of stuff in there for people to live. And the Lord told them that they would be hiding Jews in that bunker.
Yeah.
Stephen, I just got to interject because this may be a different story from the one you're highlighting, but it was also in the Midwest. But I was with you once, and it was like another person had heard from the Lord. They prepared. I mean, these were not easy steps to take. It required a lot of money and time to prepare this so the Jews could hide. So we're implying here in this podcast that there will be a lot of pressure that will come on the Jewish community, even persecution, and this will be part of how the people will want to leave North America and get back to the land. But Stephen, I remember when I was there was this one back exit that it was for, like, if they were ever found while the Jews are there, that they could easily escape. And I was just like, wow, this is really thought through.
Yeah, they do have an escape hatch there, and it is absolutely, they have their Joseph. They have a man who is called to invest in the kingdom, and God brought a Joseph to them, and they together with the vision and prayed this all in. This is what the Lord is asking us to do, and that's 4,500 square foot underground concrete, and you cannot see it from the surface at all, except for that mound with the doors, and it's in the trees, so you don't even see it. It's just incredible that it's there, and there's others. I mean, I've been out on the West Coast and met with a man that that's a long story, but he heard about me, but God had him build a barn, and he said, I want you to build a barn. And so he gets all the materials to build this barn, like a 30 by 50, a good sized barn. And as he's preparing the materials, the Lord speaks to him, before you start on the barn, I want you to dig out an underground. So this man has to go rent a bulldozer or whatever, and a shovel or whatever, and get underground and dig out this whole underground. And then God had him build the barn on top. And so when I went into that barn, trap door in the back corner, and you go underneath, and he's got all these materials that the Lord has told him over the years he needs to store up for this time that's coming. And I have the same story. I don't have anything underground, but the Lord has told me as well that, and it starts with food and water. Pure water and food are the two main things, the kind of the baseline ingredients that we're all going to need in this time of difficulty that's coming. There's so much that I've seen. There's so many difficulties that are going to affect all of us, not just the Jewish people, but believers as well, and really the world. It is bigger than just the Jewish people or even the 12 tribes. It is bigger than that, the pressure. And so in that pressure, though, we are going to be manning our stations and doing the things that God has asked us to do in order to fulfill these scriptures that we're referring to today.
It is all you've been talking about is on land and so forth. Are there other aspects that God has put together that you're aware of, that we know of, that are prepared for this hour, that what God brings before us?
Yeah, Dale, every mode of transportation that you can possibly think of is going to be used by the Lord to bring his people back. And we're talking boats, we're talking wagons, we're talking horses, we're talking airplanes, we're talking ships, we're talking any mode of transportation. And let me tell you, the discovery for me has, and even recently, has been these massive companies, transportation companies that we have heard of. If I named them, you would know them. God is the one that blessed them, and he didn't bless them just because, he wanted them to make a lot of money. He blessed them because he has a purpose for these networks to bring his people back to the land, because we're talking about tens of millions of people. It's a massive undertaking. And of course, God has to have the transportation to get us there. And I can't get into detail. I can't get into the specific things for security reasons, obviously, but it's just that you have an understanding that this is massive, and this is more than the United States. This is global, right? But even in the United States, there are networks of transportation that God has already prepared. For me, I know that personally that I will have either access to or own C-130 airplanes. And we're going to be moving food and medical supplies and school supplies around in this network of places of refuge. And that I'm not a pilot, nor do I have the means to do that kind of thing, but the Lord does. And I don't question things. I just, okay, Lord, whenever it's time, this is going to come forth. That's all I know. And so my trust is in him, who is the one who is creating and protecting and providing for this move of God that is going to happen.
So, when you said they were in the world, I was in Australia in 16 and was just sharing very sub rosa. I wasn't trying to make a big deal out of it. And as soon as we were over, this lady came running up to me. She said, "We've been prophesied to do that, and we've begun to put things together." And I would never have thought of Australia. And that's the kind of thing God's doing all across our world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because
Dale.
It's his world.
Absolutely. I was in Europe, I'll say it that way. And I was at a quote unquote secret meeting. It was, and didn't know these people, and they're just all sharing, getting to know each other a little bit. And I'm sitting there and I don't know anybody. They're all from over there. So I have no clue. God brought me to that meeting pretty amazingly. And I'm sitting in this meeting. I don't know anybody. And I look across the room and I see this man, and he's not talking to anybody. So I just get his attention. "Hey, I'm Stephen Burke. I'm from Texas." And he tells me his first name, and he doesn't say anything else. He looks away. But I know, because the Lord has already spoken to me about him, that he knows a lot, that he has a lot of information. And so I just call him out again. And I said, "Look," I said, "the Lord is telling me that you know a lot, that you have a lot of information." And this dude freaks out. He totally freaked out because I'm calling him out in a room full of people that he doesn't know, which I didn't really understand at the time. And it turns out that this man is working on the Underground Railroad for the Jews in Europe. That's what the guy does. And so here I am calling him out in a public way, and he did not like that very much. And so this is global. This is a massive thing. There are people like me who over in Europe that are doing this kind of thing, God is sending to these people to encourage them, to let them know they're not crazy, that God is doing this around the world. There's so many God stories in this. So many, brother. We could, as you said earlier, we could talk for 5 hours. We could talk for 10 hours on this subject and just share how God is doing this. It's not a man thing. This is not us doing this. This is just God doing it. And he has all these people that are like friends of God who are listening to him and obeying, no matter what people around them think or what their spouse thinks or their kids think. They're just doing it because they love God.
Okay, so Stephen, you've used that phrase about Europe like an underground railroad to get these Jews back when that pressure comes. But I've heard you use that phrase too about just here in North America, like with the slave trade, there was the Underground Railroad to free the slaves as they would move north, but it's like a reverse Underground Railroad for Aliyah, meaning the Jews will not be traveling north. They'll be going south most likely, and that there's some good reasons for that. There's ships that are being prepared in Florida. There's airstrips that are being prepared, as you've talked about, all these connections that you have and so forth, as God has really providentially led you, Stephen, to people that you've never met, and then they tell you a story of how they're preparing. So, Stephen, you're you're very knowledgeable in terms of what's going on with this network, the aspect of this fulfillment of scriptures related to Aliyah. What about things like here in North America? What kinds of things have you seen, in addition to what you've already said, but what kinds of that people are preparing for this reverse Underground Railroad?
Yeah, it is everywhere, and it is all over this country as well. The one thing I think of is how Well, okay. I was speaking at a meeting. Let me just say this in Waco, Texas. This is back in 2008. This is 15 years ago, 16 years ago. And at the end of this meeting, this woman comes up to me and she has a map of the United States in her hand. She sets it out in front of me. Have you ever seen this map? No, never seen it before. And I'm looking at this thing, and it's got all kinds of stuff on it, circles and that sort of thing. But the one big thing that it has on it is, well, let me just say where it came from. In 1988, so this is way back then, right? There was a group of women, and they were in Israel, and they were praying in Israel for this nation, for the United States. And as they began to pray, the Lord began to tell them the names of cities in the United States that would be on fire. And this is not a good fire, it's a bad fire. And the names of 6 cities that would suffer tremendous persecution without defining it. And then the name of 24 cities that would be areas of refuge. Well, let me just say there are many more than 24 cities of refuge, places of refuge. And they're not necessarily cities as such. They are people's homes, they're farms, they can be kind of within a community in a city kind of thing. But the cities that they saw that would suffer tremendous persecution, there were 3 across the north and 3 across the south. And the Lord gives one of the women a vision and shows her that those 6 cities actually form the points of the Star of David over our nation. And the Lord told them that the closer you get to the center of the Star of David, the greater the protection would be. And I just my mind was blown. I'm just looking at this map. And as it turns out, maybe a couple of years later, I'm in a meeting in Kansas City, and I meet another couple from Kansas City, and they have just come back from England, and they've been over there for 3 years. They established a place of prayer there, and I'm sharing this with them, and this woman just starts crying, and she said that the Lord has given us a Star of David map too over England. And then there's another one. I met another person, another man from India, and the same thing, that there is a star. God has given us a Star of David map over India. So this is a global thing, but gosh, the United States plays a huge role in this. And when you start looking at the center of the country, that's the breadbasket of the United States. That's where the food comes from. And that explains to me a lot about these airplanes, right? That I told you about, these C-130s that we're going to be moving food and medical supplies and school supplies around in this network. Well, the Lord is going to be using airports all over this nation that are already established, and God has had some create runways, but he is going to use the infrastructure that exists as well to do these things, because we're talking, this is a massive scale.
So you've actually run into people that have built their own airstrip because of Alia?
Yeah, on their property. And again, I'm going into other countries as well. I mean, you start talking about, Canada's the same way. You start getting into Central America, same way. God has spoken to people up and down in those places. I want you to build a runway. And even specifically where to build them. In the mountains, well, where are we going to build them in the mountains? The Lord specifically tells them where to build them, and they build them. So we are going to be using, or God is going to be using, planes to move these people as well. And as well as ships, as well as horses. I mean, because, God says he's going to be bringing them back one by one, right? So, but when you're talking tens of millions, it's going to be on a big scale. So he is going to meet them one-on-one, but it's going to be gathering them together. And when they come together, we're talking groups, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you go.
I just got to interject again here. Like, God is very serious about this. Obviously, this is his plan. This is his doing. It is what he's doing in the world today. I think there's a lot of different things we can explore, but I just actually want to highlight again, if you've not seen the movie, The Red Sea Diving Resort, it actually puts on film a number of stories. They kind of pull them together to make one story in this movie, but it'll help you to understand how serious God has been on this topic of Aliyah, the Jews migrating back to the land, how serious he's been for a long time. And now we're way, way, way down the road, as both Dale just shares that example, as well as what Stephen is saying. So I just want to encourage people, like, this is well documented. This is not some fringe thing.
Yes.
You can watch Red Sea Diving Resort. It explains what the Israeli government was up to in the 1980s on this very topic. So we're going to have to shift here. I know there's so much more we can talk about. And Stephen, we're going to have you on again here in the coming a couple months or so to go further on this. But I think there's one question here that's kind of lingering out there. And I think it's provocative. I think it's extremely important. And that is this, that, Stephen, you said we're talking about tens of millions of people in their totality. We'll talk about that in a future podcast. But there are about 6.5 million Jews that are just in North America. And this is the largest group, not in Israel. The largest group out here internationally is in North America, where these Jews have got to make the Aliyah. They've got to migrate. So I want to ask both of you, what kind of thing do you have a sense from the Lord, or just a kind of a conjecture on your part? But what kind of thing would happen in North America that would create enough pressure, even persecution, on the Jews so that they would want to make the trip back to Israel? Because there's been a movement that way anyway for quite some time. But there's also a lot of people here, Jews, Gentiles alike. We're just making a ton of money. Why do we want to leave here? So something has to happen. Do you guys have any sense of what that something might be?
Yes. And this is where you get into some, this is hard stuff to hear. And this nation, we've been pretty spoiled for a long time and protected by the hand of God. And we have, as a nation, turned away from God. And so God's going to allow some things to happen in this nation that we're not used to. And so when, as in ancient Israel, he allowed their enemies to come in and take them out, disrupt them. And again, that will be happening here as well. And that's what I saw in the download in the 2 hours. I saw a lot of things happening here. I saw electricity going away. I saw the stores closing. So there is a shaking that is coming that is more than just the Jewish people, because it affects all of us. And it is in that shaking that the Jews will be made ready to move, or they will be ready to go, and we will help them. So, but it's not just about Jews, it's about our nation. And we are, when I've traveled down in Central and South America, and when I get down there, people there have seen, they've seen people running from the United States, coming to their nations for help, because they are just running, they're leaving behind everything that they've known because there's trouble there. And so they are heading south. And so I was in Honduras one time praying one day, and the Lord just spoke to me a couple of things. But this one thing, he spoke to me and he says, right now, people from this part of the world are trying to get to the United States, which we're seeing that constantly, right? But a time is coming when people in the United States are going to want to come here. And I was like, why? Because I had no idea. And he didn't answer me. He just left that with me. And so there is trouble coming to this nation, not just economically, but militarily. There's pressure coming to this nation. There's a lot of visions I've been doing this since 2009, traveling all over this country. And people have had visions of nuclear things happening in this nation, fires of all kinds, enemy jets literally from other nations flying over major cities and blowing stuff up. So this is not fun to hear. And this is not about fear. That's what I don't want to get into, is fear here, because we are a people of faith and God has a plan in the midst of this. And so our job is to become more and more like Jesus. That's what our job is to be. And the more we are like him, the more we cultivate our friendship with the Father, the more we hear about what we're to do and really about what God's plans are, because God speaks to his friends, right? That's what he did with Abraham. I'm getting nothing but reports of evil coming from the cities on the plain. I'm going to destroy them with fire. And Abraham is his friend, starts interceding. Lord, if there's 50 righteous, don't do it or whatever. But Lot, who lived in Sodom and Gomorrah, was not a friend of God. He was righteous, it says in 2 Peter, but he wasn't a friend. And it was
Right.
that lack of friendship that cost Lot, because the two angels show up. What are you doing here? Lot says, we're here to destroy the city tomorrow morning. And so Lot, even though he was righteous, had less than 24 hours to prepare for what is to come. Abraham, being a friend of God, knew way in advance what was coming. Lot had no clue. And sadly, there are a lot of righteous people in this nation that love God that don't have any idea what is coming. And let me tell you, when I saw it in the 2 hours download, I was very, I got upset. I was a little angry. It's like, Lord, why didn't these people know? I was so mad. And we got to take care of them too. We're going to help them as well, but they're going to adjust to this new way of living in this underground kind of thing. And they are going to actually become an asset to us in the underground.
So, Stephen, what you're saying here is there's a difference from being declared righteous in Christ, and that's what Lot represents, and actually being a friend of God, where God is really leading you well in advance, both in preparation, but I also would think it would be in producing greater fruit, getting God's now message out there, that there's all of this kind of stuff that goes on for those that are like Abraham, truly a friend of God.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, Stephen, you just walked us into probably the practical aspect of this podcast, meaning, so what do we do if we're going to navigate the road to Jesus' return? I would think you would first suggest that we all take seriously becoming a friend of God.
Man, that is number one. It's our spiritual life has to be strong and get stronger. So whatever it is in our lives that interferes with your friendship with God, your relationship with God, those things need to be put away. Those things need to be put aside, or you need to turn away from them and turn toward God and cultivate and develop that friendship, that relationship that you have with the Father, with Jesus. We have to do that, and that's the beginning. It's when the Lord called me out of my career, He brought me to the chapel I was working in a hospital. He brought me to the chapel one day and he said, "Stephen, do you love me?" And I said, "Yeah, I love you." And he said it again, just like with Peter. "And do you love me?" "Yes, I love you." "Stephen, do you love me?" And I just started crying, I'm just weeping. And I said, "Lord, you know I love you, and I will go and I will do and I will say whatever you want me to." And that was the beginning of my walk with the Lord as a friend of God. That willingness to go and do and say whatever God wants. That's where it starts. And then everything else starts coming. Then God shows you what's on His heart, and He shows you how you prepare for that. What, you store up food, it's not about being a prepper at all. This is about being a friend of God and obedient to the things that He asks us to do. There are people God has collecting horses. There are people out there that God has said to start making wagons. There are people out there that have said you need to store up food and all kinds of things going on out there, that school supplies, somebody else, the Lord has told us to store up school supplies. People are moving. God has had people move from where they live in the country to strategic places because they know they are getting in position for a time of movement, of helping people move. It is going to be a massive thing, but man, it all does start with that relationship with God.
And it's not something that you choose. This is something that He chooses. And I was thinking of the end of John with Peter there. And, well, what about him, Lord? He's talking about, well, what about John? You don't worry about him. You just do what I tell you to do. And I think that's because we can get off. I mean, I've got some fabulous stories, and I want to be like that guy. And I'm not going to be like him. I have to be the best Dale I can be, who's a friend of God, and then do what he tells me to do.
You know, when you look at Lot, when you continue to look at Lot, and when he and the two angels and his wife and two daughters are running out of Sodom and Gomorrah, they're running toward the mountains. Lot realizes we don't have time to make it to those mountains. But here's a little town called Zoar, and he turns to the angels and asks them, can we stay here at Zoar? And the angel says, yes, but you need to hurry up and get there because we can't start the destruction until you're there. So a city of refuge, a place of refuge has to be approved of heaven. It can't just be your idea. God is the one
Amen.
who decides if it can be. We can ask, but we have to hear clearly from God that yes, this place is a place of refuge, and Zoar was his place. Mm-hmm. And so he's running with his wife and the two daughters. His wife turns back, she's gone. So Lot makes it to Zoar with his two daughters, and they survive the judgment that fell on the cities on the plains.
And Stephen, we'll have to get into this on a future podcast, but I've heard you talk about that what's at the center of these places of refuge, or I've heard, Dale, you call it places of his presence, but you have the favor of God, you have the protection of God. But what's at the center of each of these is a house of prayer, a community of believers that are seeking God together, that spend significant time in prayer together, whether that's daily, weekly, or whatever. But there is a house of prayer where James 4, draw near to God. He will draw near to us, and all the more important in light of what's coming. So we're going to have to kind of conclude here, but thank you, Stephen. I look forward to future podcasts. I do want to say, Dale, anything that you might have on your radar or sense from the Lord in light of the pressure that's coming to North America?
I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that Stephen said it so well. We as believers will not be spared in what's coming. And so I think one of the things we try to do as leaders and preachers and so forth is prepare for what's coming. It's very difficult. I say it all the time, when you preach and then you just see glazed over eyes and nobody seems to want to do anything. But what's exciting for me is one or two people who come up afterwards and say, well, what about this? And how could I do this? And so there is, I think, a growing number of people who are friends of God and who want to do what he wants them to do.
Yeah, thanks, Dale. Both you guys so good, so helpful. And I think if I just have one lingering thought myself here is, again, on this practical side, maybe you've kind of felt these nudges from God, and it could have something to do with what we're talking about in terms of helping the Jews in some way, or helping in the process of Aliyah, or maybe during this podcast, God has been kind of stirring something in you. Your practical takeaway in terms of navigating the road to Jesus' return, don't suppress that stirring that you're feeling right now, or maybe you felt in the past. But go ahead and pray into it. Follow that lead and ask God to connect you to people that care about these things. Because as we started this podcast, we're going to end it. And that is, this is a global move of God that is happening right now. It's been happening at least for several decades, probably longer. But the point is that we are on the cusp of the last part of this huge surge of Jews immigrating back to Israel. And so maybe God is actually touching your life and you need to be part of this. So follow that leading. So again, thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Dale. And thank all of you for joining us here on Last Call. We look forward to being with you next time.